Welcome back, Warhammer Man Studios. Today we're looking at the Necromunda Dark Uprising set. As you can see, I went ahead and mocked up some floors, basically like the catwalk or final level for this stage of our Dark Uprising Zone Mortalis board. And all I basically did was just cut out a little bit of paper and essentially finished up the spiral staircase over here. I moved our first staircase from the bottom floor back there over here in the meantime, so I could kind of see how that was all going to play out. And then I'm going to replace that one down there. I'll put the stairways over here, so that's 4 sets of stairs I'm going to need there. And then I'm going to need basically all these pieces for the catwalks. I wasn't expecting all this stuff and the stair sprues to come in until Monday based on tracking, but they ended up arriving today with my Sisters of Battle box set, so I was pretty excited about that. But I haven't dove into them yet. I wanted to finish up this project, at least this stage of the project, so I can get to painting it. I want to put something in the back corner over there and the front corner over here. I'm going to get everything set up, get the catwalks laid out and everything, make sure it's all exactly as as basically I pictured it, and then I can break down like the whole board, take it apart, get it all prepped for paint, and start painting so we can get some games on this thing and start getting it moving. It's already looking awesome. It's tough with the camera angle to tell what's going on because the catwalks do block a lot of it. But I think once the board is shifted to, like how I was saying, I'm going to do the 90-degree shift. I think that'll help with the camera angle as well. But when we do the battle reports, the camera will be like elevated looking down anyway. So I think it's actually going to get like with the angle, it's going to be a lot better than this angle that I currently have for the camera, because it is like a little bit lower as opposed to kind of like looking down onto the board. I don't think the catwalks would quite block as much because it's a little bit more of like a steep angle. So but anyway, you see like the basic layout for it. I have a pretty good idea exactly which sprues I'm going to need, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm going to be going back after I basically like finish everything up and just doing like a once over of everything that I clipped. The majority of it has been like pretty well cleaned, but sometimes I get carried away and like forget to clean a piece here and there or whatever. So I do always just go back over before I do like my base coat or whatever. And worst case scenario, if you do miss a spot or whatever, it's not like end of the world or anything like that either. You just like, I'll scrape off like mold lines even after I've base coated something, like no problem. Because like you're probably going to just immediately, I'll just put like a layer of whatever color paint on top of it. But I mean, chances are by the time the model is done, there's going to be multiple layers of paint on top of something, especially terrain typically. So the last thing I'm worried about is scraping off a tiny bit of like my base coat or undercoat or whatever, versus just going ahead and scraping that off and then just putting a little bit of extra paint right on top of it is not a big deal when you consider, like, I see people's models before and they're like beautiful models and awesome paint jobs, and they like never clean their mold lines. And honestly, like, in my opinion, that's like cardinal sin type status. That's terrible. There's one of those bad boys. Man, I really wish, like, honestly, I wish, like, the sprues came just a little bit different, like, in the set. At first, I thought, like, I was going to need more doors. But the way mine is set up compared to just, like, how you could typically set it up, like, I think if it was a more of a, like, two-dimensional, like, Space Hulk style board, I think that would be more necessary. Like, you'd want like a ton of sliding doors and everything. But as you switch into like the 3D realm of it, I think you'll find that the doors are less of a necessity. Like, you have to have a pretty solid board, and when I say solid, I mean like lots of pillars and walls. If you're gonna have multiple levels and need a bunch of doors, like I have no doors on the second level of this board, and no walls on the second level of this board. So in order for you to need a door, obviously you would need a wall somewhere. So I'm not even close to needing doors on the second or third level in this case, obviously. But as you can see, that's going to be the basis of a catwalk. Which I'm not gonna lie, like, I didn't necessarily like think this up like way ahead of time or anything like that. I kind of have been like expanding up. I had a good idea that I wanted to do, obviously the spiral staircase as I discussed, and then also I like the idea of like the lift that you could take to the second level, and then somehow like connecting those two. So once I spaced out like the two lifts and decided which corner the spiral staircase was going to go in, it was basically just like, you know, going from there essentially. And that's why I've been kind of just going along that same path since then. And we kind of just ended up exactly where we're at right now, partially by chance, but also partially by like the fact that this is sort of like a grid setup, means that there's not like a ton of, there's a million options, but in the end, a lot of the options that you do have are led in the same direction. So like no two people could ever assemble this board the same way, like unless they were doing it on purpose, like unless you were using an instruction manual or something like that. But the basic principles of the board will be the same for everyone. You know, when the board is like essentially getting filled out, like after a while there's only so many places you can put a pillar. Like there's 16 slots where you can put like a column or a pillar in. So like, you know, the only slots you can put a wall are the slots in between those, and the only direction the walls can be is in the same direction as the pillars. So the walls can run essentially like in that cross pattern, but you can't just put a wall like in the middle of nowhere randomly. It won't fit in. It has to line up with the segment of pillars. So although you do have like basically endless configurations, there is still some limit to what you can and can't build. So but I'm just not seeing, honestly, like the necessity of the doors in the same way that you would think. And that was one when I first opened up the sprue and I saw you get 2 big ones and 2 little ones, and you only get 1 door sprue in the whole set. I was thinking, man, I wish I could give up a column and just get 1 more of the doors, like 2 columns, you know what I mean? But then when you realize you get 12 columns, your board has 16 places basically. So on a 2D board, you basically get to take up like 12 of the 16 spaces. So if you want to go more than 2D, like you want to have a second level of columns, every extra column that you go up is 1 less you have on your base board. So if you have just 2 columns that are 2 levels high, you know, now instead of having 12 columns on your ground level, you're only going to have 10 columns because you use 2 of them on the second level. So realistically, you know, if you wanted a full level of 2 columns to fill out the board, you would need 32. And you get 12 in the set, so you need almost 3 sets to do 2 levels. So in all reality, you know, depending what style board you want to build is really like what of each sprue, how many of each sprue like you really need to have. Because the higher your board goes up, like the more the floor panels and what I'm doing right now, like the kind of catwalk stuff, the more important that is, because you're like suspending basically walkways on nothing, as opposed to when you're doing the second level, it's a little bit different, because if you have built up the ground with walls, they're actually like you could find a lot more of a necessity for walls. But if you stop using walls on the second level, you're obviously not going to need them on the third level either. But if I say like double stacked walls back there, I would just have this giant like massive wall that you like can't see through and can't interact with, and that's not really like the style that I'm going for. So again, while it's really cool that they have that, you may find, you know, that it's not what you need for like a certain style of build. So if you decide like you're going to change your board up or whatever, like it's not necessarily bad for, you know, one style if you have a bunch of extra parts and you're thinking, man, this sucks, this stuff's all like going to waste. Because when you build your board like a different style, you may find that all those parts are a necessity and you wish you had more of something else. So in a lot of ways, like, this really is like a giant Lego set that you can just always expand on. And I'm sure they're going to be like coming out with, new pieces and new bits and new stuff that's compatible with it as well. Obviously they've gotten like a good response from it. Well, I can't say obviously because it's such a small sample size at this point in time, and I know a lot of members of the community were like upset with the cost of it. In my opinion, they could have handled that a little bit differently, and maybe like I understand like for a lot of people, a $300 set is expensive because even if you split that with a buddy, it's $150 a person. So if you're young or poor, obviously that could be a barrier of entry. Or if you just don't have anybody else that's interested in it, like maybe you just live with your girl and game with your buddies and nobody's really interested in Necromunda, so you gotta buy it yourself. Like most people can't just swing $300. Like I get that, I totally do. And so in that sense, I understand why people would be disappointed with it, at least like in the way that it was presented. And I think part of that's on Games Workshop, because had they come out with like 2 sets, like the full-on Necromunda set and then just like the terrain set as well, like right away, it wouldn't feel like a barrier of entry to people that maybe aren't like hyped on Necromunda. But instead, it's sort of like basically like pushes those people and says like, oh, we don't really care about what you want. We know you want this, and we want to see like how bad you want it, basically. Because realistically, everyone knows that eventually all this Zone Mortalis stuff is going to come out separately. It will be available separately. They're going to have, expansion kits probably for somewhere in like the $50 to $60 range, that has a little bit of stuff on it, a few sprues, and then they'll have, like a larger, basically like box setup for, probably somewhere in the $100 range, $120 range, and it'll be like, a decent little startup, and then eventually they'll have it split down to where, you can get, essentially like specialized boxes with smaller amounts of specific things. So there might be one that has like a bunch of walls and walls and doors in it. There might be one that has like a ton of stairs and walkways, etc. Games Workshop just in general likes to do stuff like that. So I think over time you'll see that. But again, the problem is that it feels like a barrier to entry when you release something that people want, and you team it up with something that they probably don't want. And I say probably don't want without statistics right in front of me, but I'm guessing that if you took the amount of people that play like 40k and Kill Team and Necromunda, and then you divided that by the amount of people that just play Necromunda out of that and don't play Kill Team, don't play 40k, like I suspect it's a huge difference. Like as in the market is way more than just people who play Necromunda that might be interested in this set. And like, I mean, again, without having statistics right in front of me, I feel like I can go as far as to say I can guarantee that there's more people who play 40k and Kill Team and other random people that might be interested in the set that don't in fact play Necromunda. And like my brother and I, we grew up playing Necromunda and we loved it. We used to have like an awesome campaign. We had a ton of turnout. It was probably the best campaign or season experience that we've ever had, and that's with like the old school Necromunda. I mean, it was phenomenal. Everybody got super into it. There was always games to be played. There was a certain number of games you had to play to like advance, and then you could do a certain number of extra games on the side. But it was super fun. Everybody was always around, like grinding out games. It was an awesome experience. But when the new one came out and it just didn't have the terrain, and it just didn't get the hype, and people just didn't seem that into it, and we just couldn't really get it to catch on or anything. So it kind of just was like dust in the wind. And so when this came out, this is like the perfect opportunity to essentially like revive Necromunda. So I do give them mad props for that. But at the same sense, if you look at that from like a customer standpoint, like, you basically took something that I want and offered it with something that I don't want. And I say I don't want because if I wanted it, I'd be playing Necromunda right now, and you wouldn't have to be like trying to like drag me into a game that I don't currently play.